You've probably seen it a time or two if you're on TikTok or Instagram Reels. Someone running along on the beach, maybe they're holding their kid's hand, and then you see the supers that say, I make $10,000 a month on Airbnb. I only work 1 hour a decade. I've got a whole team and it's 100% passive. And now I'm a millionaire because of, the fact that I'm a full-time real estate investor and I quit my 9 to 5 job because I just believed in my, golly, I hate it. I do. Today, we're going to explore the unconventional thoughts here of Rob Abasolo and the unsexy opinion that I'm going to give today on why I don't think you should quit your 9 to 5 job and become a full-time real estate investor, and why I think that very simple premise and concept is a scam for so many people that fall prey to these TikToks and YouTubes and YouTubes. I feel like an old person. These YouTubes and the TikToks. Listen, there's some truth to it. Obviously, I believe that real estate can help you retire. Obviously, I believe that real estate can help you get financial freedom. Obviously, I believe that you can quit your job to become a full-time real estate investor. And if you stick around until the end of the video, I will talk about how you can do that. But before you do that, we need to talk about what that actually means, the ramifications, and the unsexy things that come along with being a full-time real estate investor. So let's jump into it. By the way, I quit my job to become a full-time real estate investor. I am a full-time real estate investor. I've helped many people quit their jobs to become real estate investors. So I promise this is all coming from a place of love, and I genuinely think it is possible, obviously. So this isn't me just having a hot take just to have one. I just want you to consider everything before you fall into this dream of becoming a full-time real estate investor, because it's actually a lot harder and way more of a grind than what is talked about on Instagram. And that's the thing I hate about Instagram and TikTok is even my content sort of leans that way because I don't have that much time on Instagram to give you the full context. Whereas on YouTube, I can do a one-take pony here and really kind of give you the good, bad, and ugly. And yes, this is a one-take edit. I'm going to say Caleb is still fully employed. He's fine. He's not locked up in a closet at one of my Airbnbs. He's still employed. We're just trying this one-take thing because it's very popular on YouTube for whatever reason, but I'm sure we'll get back to the edit soon. So with that said, let's jump into when I actually quit my job, and hopefully that will give a little bit of clarity and context as to why I feel the way I do. I was making $110,000 at my job as a full-time copywriter, and that basically means I wrote words for brands. And I was also self-managing 14 short-term rentals. So, how can you do both? Barely. I wasn't a good employee, I'll say that. But, I would leave work early. I would get to work late. I would leave meetings to go address all the things that were happening in my short-term rental portfolio. But nonetheless, I was doing both. And I had a couple partners that would also help pick up the slack too, for sure. But for the most part, I was fully ingrained in this Airbnb business. And when I got to this idea that I wanted to quit my job, the first thing that I told myself was I didn't want to really rely on my Airbnb income. And, you can replace Airbnb with long-term rental income, whatever is specific to your situation. But I never wanted to use my Airbnb income because I recognized very quickly that if I did, then where would I get the money to get more Airbnbs? And that's, I think, the first shortcoming that most people don't really understand is when you make money at a job and then you get real estate, if you spend all that money that you're making in real estate, you actually haven't really advanced at all. All you've done is just buy houses, and sure, you might get equity over time, but if you go for the instant gratification of spending your cash flow, you're doing yourself a disservice. And so for me, I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to make money other ways. And so I started a YouTube channel. I actually didn't do that for the money, but I ended up obviously doing okay on that if you're watching this right now. And, I was starting to make $2,000 or $3,000 a month doing that. All of which, to be honest, I paid to my editor, to Caleb. And that's really how I started the YouTube thing. But what was cool was that YouTube led to me starting a consultation business where people could book me for an hour of my time. And then that would cost them anywhere from $150 to $500 an hour, depending on when they booked me in my trajectory. And just from that alone, I built up this consultation side business that was making like $20,000 a month. And I was also making, great money on Airbnb. I had this consultation business, and I was always just figuring out ways to make money which brings me to the main point of this video. And it's like, you should figure out how to make money outside of your 9-to-5 job, because I think it is actually pretty dangerously risky to only make money there. I also think you should make money outside of real estate. And you should figure out how to monetize your skills, your brain, your knowledge, your whatever you're good at. Figure out how to monetize that so that that's the thing that supports you while you build up this real estate portfolio and while you ramp up to maybe eventually quit your 9-to-5 job. But I got to this point where I was managing short-term rentals. I scheduled a Zoom meeting with my bosses to quit. They answered the Zoom. They're like, "What's going on?" And I was like, and they're like, "Is everything okay, Rob?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm quitting." And they were like, "Oh gosh, don't do that." Yeah, of course you're quitting. You're obviously successful at the other things that you're doing. And they were like, "But are you going to be okay financially? I mean, obviously that must be why you're crying." And I was like, "Yeah, I make way more money doing the other things than I make here." And they were like, yeah, you got to quit. And so it sort of dawned on me that I had really focused on figuring out how to build different income streams, one of them being real estate, but how to monetize and how to make money outside of work, outside of real estate. Whenever I quit, it was actually kind of like a very no-brainer for me. You know, I was making $110,000 a year at my job, but I built up these income streams that, you know, would have made me $300,000 to $500,000 had I just gone all in and focused on those. And that's kind of where I was. I was at this like $30,000, $40,000 mark with the consultations, Airbnb, and everything. And so when I quit, I was like, oh, duh. Like, I'm actually losing money by being at my job. And that's really, I think, the turning point for most people is that they're so ready to quit their job. They're like, I gotta quit. I gotta get out of this thing, that they sort of prematurely quit. Whereas the way I think that you should really think about this is like, you have these side incomes and these side hustles in real estate, and like literally you working your job is costing you money from exploding these side hustles. But people want to just quit their job when the side hustles are just beginning, and then they do, and then guess what? They oftentimes end up going and probably getting a job again because they didn't really do the due diligence they needed to build their businesses. And that's what really happens on the real estate side is someone gets a taste of this Airbnb income and they make $1,000 or $2,000 a month, and they're like, oh my gosh, if I just do this 5 times, that's $10,000 a month. And technically that's true from a mathematics standpoint, but that doesn't mean that that's how it works or that it's that easy. And so one of the things that I would want to talk to right now is sort of like why quitting your job can be a little short-sighted and things that you should consider when you quit your 9-to-5 job to become a full-time real estate investor. So let's jump into that. When you become a full-time real estate investor, what you've done is you have made it infinitely more difficult for you to get a loan from the bank. When a bank gives you a loan to buy a house, they need W-2 stable income, they need your pay stubs, and they want to see that you are a loanable person. However, this idea of becoming a full-time real estate investor comes through. You quit your job, and now you literally can't buy real estate because the bank says, no, you're poor, sir. I'm speaking from experience here. I made way more money when I quit my job than I did at my job, and the bank was still like, no, sir. We're not going to do that. We see that you have enough money in your bank account to buy this specific house in cash, but you're still unlendable. And it's really hard. It's not to say that there aren't options for you. There are definitely things that you can do. You can get a DSCR loan. A DSCR loan is a debt service coverage ratio loan where they qualify you for that mortgage based on the potential income of that property. You can do what's called a bank statement loan where they take, if you've got large sums of cash, for example, or you have solid income coming in from your entrepreneurial ventures, they'll look at your bank statement and say, oh yes, Rob makes $20,000, $30,000 a month consistently, and they qualify you for that. However, when you go that route, those loans are way, 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 way more expensive. I think I heard someone tell me recently they got a 6.75% on a conventional investment loan, which is mind-blowing. That's actually pretty good. But I just talked to someone yesterday who got a DSCR quote, and it was between 7.5% to 9%. If they wanted the 7.5%, they were going to have to pay 3 points, which is 1 percentage point of the loan total. So on a million house, it'd be $30,000 that they'd have to pay in points to get a 7.5. And then on top of that, you have to pay prepayment penalties where if you decide to refi out of that loan before 5 years, you've also got to pay 1, 2, or 3 points. So you do have loan programs available to you, but they aren't really that great. And I'm not saying that they make it impossible for you to become an investor and scale up your portfolio. I'm just saying it makes it a lot harder for deals to pencil at 8.5% versus 6.75%. So you shouldn't take your stability in your income for granted because you're basically chopping yourself off at the knees if you cut out your stable income and chopping yourself down at the knees in terms of scaling and buying more property. And then if you actually do want to get a loan from a bank, you will have to have self-employment 1099 income for 2 years on your taxes before they really take you seriously. I think I'm actually on year 3 now, and it's still pretty hard for me to get a job, and I make a great income. So I just want to be very clear that you don't want to underestimate how difficult this will make your life. There are other ways around it. You can get partners who can qualify for the loan. You can get these like bank statement loans. Look, there are solutions to everything, but finding a partner that will just co-sign on the loan and do all that, it's not necessarily that easy either. So just keep that in mind. You're also losing your benefits. You're losing healthcare. For me, I used to have Cobra, which was like a extension of the health care that I had from the work that I used to have at my advertising job. And it was like $2,000 a month. That sucked. I didn't realize that that's how much my company was paying for my healthcare. And that's what I was paying for like 2 years. And it wasn't only until I think the last year, I think we signed up for a company called Zion Health, which is a health share, which the jury's still out on if that's good or not, but it's actually worked out for us pretty well. It's like $500 a month. And it doesn't work the way insurance companies work. It's like everybody chips into this pool. They reimburse me for big procedures. I haven't really had to use it all that much, admittedly, but it's one of those things that when you quit your job, like, especially if you have a wife, if you have kids, if you have a plural kids, if you have kids, it is your responsibility, or if you have a husband and kids, it doesn't, whoever's watching this, you have a responsibility to provide for them, right? And you have a responsibility to provide the healthcare for them. And I'm just saying, healthcare ain't cheap. And so I really wouldn't take for granted the gift of healthcare, the gift of stable income, because I also wanted to talk about the loss of stability that you have, right? The banks don't like that you don't have income stability, but you also don't have a solid paycheck coming in every single month, whereas real estate is very volatile. There are a lot of reasons why you might lose money in real estate at any given time. I'll give you a really great example. This is an extreme example. Admittedly, it's not a relatable example, but I'll give it to you anyways. So I've got my Scottsdale property. I bought that with a partner. I've mentioned to you, I've exploded the revenue on that. We're in March right now. The revenue is looking at about $42,000 a year. $42,000 this month. Well, last year it was $14,400. My expenses on that property run around $7,000 a month. So last year I lost $7,000. This year I'm going to make like $25K on it, something like that, which is pretty stupid. But regardless, like I had to really work with that property for about a year before I figured out how to get it from here to here. And there's this like thing where you might buy properties that just don't work out for a while, or you might buy a property where the AC goes out, the roof goes out, the appliances all go out the same year, and now you've got to pay like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to just repair all the CapEx, the capital expenditures on a single property. And what are you going to do? You have to pull from your rental income to pay for that if you weren't saving up for reserves, which a lot of people don't. And so now you've gone from making whatever money you were to in the red because you have to pay to fix your place. And now what? You actually didn't make any money that month. So what people don't realize when they go into the real estate game is like expenses run high and they kind of ebb and flow. And when it rains, it pours. And there will be months where you feel like a genius and there will be months where you feel like an idiot. And not having a solid financial foundation in the world of W-2s and 9-to-5s will make that way more stressful for you. And then lastly, and this one's kind of like probably a little bit more obvious, but I just don't feel like people take this too seriously, is if you don't have a 9-to-5 job, you also don't have money to invest into your portfolio to buy more houses. You could go and raise it. You can go get private money lenders, sure, but either way, you're out of money. You're at the mercy of whoever will lend you money from a private money lending perspective, or whoever will partner with you. And so I always like to put it this way. Benefits typically account for 20 to 30% of your comp plan at your W-2 job. So if you're making $100,000 at a W-2 job, well, really that salary is worth more, like $120,000 to $130,000. So let's write that down really fast. I don't lose track of it. We'll say on the high end, $130,000. And that's why I think when you quit your 9-to-5 job to become a full-time real estate investor, you're not trying to make $100K. This is assuming you make 100. If you make 50, do your own math here. But you're trying to actually make $130,000 because you're trying to make up for the loss of 401k match, healthcare, the benefits that you got at your job. But not only that, that just gets you to break even, right? Like if I'm trying to replace a $100,000 salary with real estate, just to break even with where I was, I'd have to be at $130,000. But then I also think that you should make more money than that, because you also need money to then go and be able to invest. And so for me, I always say you want to try to make 1.5x what you're making at your 9-to-5 job to really have enough cushion to kind of keep things running. And so on $100,000, that would be $150,000. That's what I'd want to make at my job before I quit, which me personally, I was way above that, but not everybody kind of considers this. And so it sort of brings me to this calculation that I want you all to think about whenever you're considering quitting your job. And I just want you to reverse engineer how hard it is to quit your job. And I don't want you to just what I don't want is for you to get into real estate thinking you're going to quit your job in 6 months or 12 months without having really created the math path, I'll call it, to actually determine what needs to happen for you to do that. So let's just go on a $100,000 example. If you want to make $100,000, just to keep it easy, if you want to make $100,000 a year in real estate, then that means that you will have had to invest, I'm pretty sure this is right, but $1 million total. $1 million total, assuming you got a 10% return, would bring you to $100,000 a year if you got a 10% cash on cash return. Let me run that math really fast. I should have done this before, but roughly speaking, if you invested $1 million into real estate and you got a 10% return, that'd be $100,000 a year. So in order to invest $1 million into real estate, it's really not that easy, right? Like you have to put in a ton of money. You have to save up a lot of money and invest consistently and all that kind of stuff to do it like the long way, the harder way, right? Which is like long-term rentals and the more conventional route. I think that you can get there faster with Airbnb and doing other methods there. But for the most part, just a general calculation, 10% ROI on $1 million invested is $100,000 a year if you're looking at it from a cash on cash perspective. So it takes you a while to get there. And this is sort of where some of these like Instagrammers and TikTokers win, because they get you like so amped up on the idea of like rental arbitrage and like, oh, for $10,000, you can get into your first apartment and that'll make you $1,000 and you can negotiate with the landlord and you can do this and you can do that. And so I actually do think you can build up a business that makes you $10,000 a month, but it's not really, you're still just building another job and you don't actually get the wealth or the equity that comes from buying real estate. And so when you're thinking about this world of like, all right, well, I have to invest a ton of money into real estate. How can I make $100,000 doing real estate? I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to talk you through like ways that you could actually make that money if you do want to quit your job. But one other little note here that I have at the top of mind is you also have to really kind of consider portfolio architecture and seasonality whenever deciding if you want to quit your 9-to-5 job. And portfolio architecture basically means, is your portfolio structured in a way that it can consistently produce you money every single month? And that's not always the case, especially in the short-term rental side of things. I'll give you a great example. I've got a beach house in Crystal Beach, and that house really makes money from May to September. But then from September to, April, it's crickets. I make some money, enough to pay the mortgage sometimes. Sometimes I might lose a little bit of money, but really it's 4 months out of the year where I'm making a ton of money. And if you have 5 of those, then you're only ever making money 4 times out of the year. And you have to structure your payments to yourself in a way that makes sense and that you're not, taking all the money out. You're basically saving for the slow months. And so you want to try to develop this portfolio where the architecture is, hey, you've got some big hitters in the summer, you've got some big hitters in the winter, you've got some big hitters in the spring, and then you got some big hitters this is more on the short-term side, but in the fall, like the Smoky Mountains. That is a very strong fall market for me, but it's dead for me basically January, February, the beginning of March. And so I need something like my beach house in the summer that's holding strong. But then I also need something like Scottsdale, that property that's holding strong for me November through basically May, right? And so I structure my portfolio in a way where I'm consistently making money every single month. And that's really what you should be striving for, is building this portfolio that builds very consistent income when it's all averaged out together and you're not really like bleeding or you're not losing money all at the same time every year. So for example, my beach house, like I'm saying, it loses money September through, let's say, call it May. So if I'm going to lose money in those months, I kind of need a property like my Scottsdale property or my Gatlinburg property to really crank cash in those months so that the loss that I'm taking on the beach house is made up for and then some with my other properties. And you really have to be strategic about how you put your portfolio together so that whenever you quit your job, it's like a pretty seamless transition. And that's kind of my thoughts there, is like, there's a lot of strategy here, and this video is already kind of starting to run a little bit long, but like, it's not something that you're just like, yeah, I'm going to make $10,000 a month. I'm going to make $100,000 a year through real estate. Let's go, bro. I'm like so ready. It's like, it took me like 5, 6, 7 years to do that. And it takes a lot of people longer, and it takes some people shorter. So let's talk about how you can actually quit your 9-to-5 job and like what you would have to do in order to do that. Rona. All right. So in order to do so, you really have to think about real estate a little differently. Here's how I actually think you could quit your 9-to-5 job to do real estate. And that would basically be to really churn up your active income and the active income that you're producing. So a couple of ways that you can have active income in your portfolio would be flipping. And that's where you go and you buy a property, you rehab it, and then you sell it for a profit. So let's say you buy it for 100, you put in 50 to fix it up, and you'll make 50 as a result. Well, you've now got $50,000 in profit, and that's a really large chunk of change. Now, it's not all that sexy because now you got to pay short-term capital gains on $50,000, which is a little, it's less than half, but it's it's close enough for this example. You're not going to pay $25,000 to Uncle Sam, and you're going to keep $25,000 for yourself. So what does that tell us? You have to do that 4 times to make $100,000, right? And it usually takes you a few months to 6 months to do a full-on gut job and renovation at your property. So that's something that I think you should keep in mind, is like, you can flip. You can also do wholesaling. Wholesaling is basically where you go and you get a property under contract and you get it for lower than market value. Let's say the house is worth $200K and you go and you lock it up for $180, and then you go and you find an off-market buyer who will buy it from you for $200, and you make a $20,000 spread. Lots of people make their money doing that. Now, you get into some ethical gray zones there. I'm not going to talk about that on this video, but you want to make sure that you're ethically doing it. And yes, believe it or not, there are ways to ethically wholesale. But most people think in their mind, they're like, oh, you're ripping off grannies and taking their equities. That's definitely not always the case. As a matter of fact, in the creative side of things, like creative finance, oftentimes what happens is I will work with a wholesaler that will go and find a seller, like a distressed seller who's upside down on their house, and they will lock up that contract and then assign it to me, and I will take over payments for that home, and I will now inherit their 2.5 or 3% interest rate. And because I get this smoking deal, I pay that wholesaler a $10,000 or a $20,000 assignment fee for having found that deal for me. Now, I know plenty of creative finance wholesalers that make 6 figures every single year doing that. And I actually know a guy who is approaching $500,000 a year just doing assignments. So The way you make six figures in real estate and have it be sustainable is you kind of have to churn up this active flipping thing, right? You're diversifying how and where you're making your money from real estate. So maybe you make $50,000 a year flipping, maybe you make $30,000 a year from assignments, and then maybe you make $20,000 a year from rental income. If that's the case, that's actually pretty decent. Like, that's a good way to make a living. But here's the reality that most people don't realize is that it's all a job. If you're flipping a house or you're wholesaling, you're getting a one-time paycheck, and sure, it's great money, and sure, you're a full-time real estate investor. But if you stop working and if you stop flipping and if you stop wholesaling, you stop making money. Whereas on rental income, the great thing about it is, you can build that up over time. And yes, eventually you can get to this point where you're making $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year. But as I've mentioned, I don't want you really ever spending that money. I want you reinvesting that back into more real estate. But it's kind of funny to me because people are like, yeah, I want to do flips and I want to do this and I want to replace my 9-to-5 and I'm just going to become a flipper. I'm going to become a wholesale. And what they don't realize is they've built a job. And it's not a bad thing because maybe they love it more and maybe it does provide them more flexibility and freedom than working a 9-to-5, but it is still a job. Real estate is a job. I love real estate for better or for worse. It keeps me busy. It's been the reason that I've have so many gray hairs on my head, but I love it. I love doing it, but it is a job. Am I passionate about this job? Yes. Am I passionate about the fact that I make more money doing my job versus what I was doing at my 9-to-5? Yeah, but it is still a job and there's still a grind that's involved with it. And that's what most people don't think about. They think about that TikTok with that guy or the person that's running on the beach with their kids. And they're like, I make $10,000 a month passively. And the truth is, if you take this 6-figure route that I just showed you on how to make $100,000 a year from wholesaling and flipping, it's quite literally everything but passive. Again, it doesn't make it a bad thing. It just makes it, not necessarily one-to-one with the real estate dreams that were sold on TikTok and on Instagram and occasionally on YouTube. So that's it. That's my spiel today. I think if you want to quit your 9-to-5 job, absolutely do it. Figure out how to make other money, other income streams in your life from your side hustles, from whatever it is you do. Make money on the rental side too, but don't spend it. Use it to reinvest back into your portfolio. And it is possible, guys. It really is. Like, I don't want you to see this and be like, oh, Rob doesn't want me to do. I want you to be a real estate investor. I just don't want you to prematurely quit your job, because what I don't want is what happens if you bought a short-term rental? What if it was making $10,000 a month? And what happens when you rely on that $10,000 a month, but the city makes that short-term rental illegal? You've now lost all of your income, right? It happens. It can happen. And that's why I think portfolio architecture is so important, because if you had 4 or 5 or 6 other rentals in different parts of the country that could counteract that, it wouldn't hurt so bad. So that's where I'm going to end today. Some of you, your ears might have perked up when I talked about the creative finance side of things. This is what I'm all in on these days, is creative hosting, which is mirroring creative finance with Airbnb hosting, short-term rental hosting, and getting better returns and getting 2, 3, 4, 5% interest rates. Doing so, if that's interesting to you, I have a link in the description down below. Lead you to a case study that talks about how I find deals, the types of deals that I'm finding, and how I use them to build my portfolio today in 2024. Like in 2024. If you like this video, by the way, if it was valuable, if it made you think, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Stats show that the majority of people that watch my videos don't subscribe. And if you did subscribe, it would change my life. Like, genuinely, on the YouTube machine, YouTube would be like, oh, Rob's getting a ton of followers. Let's keep promoting his content. Yeah. So with that said, don't quit your 9-to-5 just yet. Grind it out, make as much money as possible. And when it's costing you money to work your 9-to-5 job, then you can consider it. Until then, I'll catch you on the next episode of Raw Built. All right. Bye.